Caleb Harrelson here, the host of the Engaged Truth podcast. We engage with popular claims and objections against Christianity, and we make the case that Christianity is total truth for all of reality. And I'm super excited about today's episode, as I have joining me again is Dr. Charles Jackson. How are you doing, Dr. J?
Pretty good. How are you, Caleb?
Oh, I'm doing great. Well, I'm so excited to have you. And those of you, if it's your first time being exposed to Dr. J, he was in a phenomenal movie, Genesis Paradise Lost. He's a member of Mensa, and he also has an incredible ministry called Points of Origin, and where he reviews popular textbook claims, kind of like we're going to do today, and he responds to those. So what we're doing, we're picking up on week 2 of our series on answering the biology textbooks on evolution. But before we get to that, I want to make a couple of remarks on why this matters and why you should care about this issue. I have a quote from this really great book put out by ICR. It's on ICR.org. You can find more about them, Institute for Creation Research. And here's a quote from this book, Creation Basics and Beyond. And they say in here, if creation is just a myth, if people are just evolved animals, then how can they be distinct from animals? Indeed, animals have no real moral code at all. If a lion kills another lion, we don't view it as a wrong, and we don't throw the lion in jail. What one animal does to another is morally irrelevant. So how could the act of murder be considered wrong if humans are no qualitatively different than animals? Any distinction would be arbitrary and subjective. Someone might say that animals are more intelligent than our humans are more intelligent than animals, which is why humans have more rights and should not be killed. But this standard is arbitrary and leads to the bizarre conclusion that smarter humans have more value and rights than less intelligent ones. Should a person with a very high IQ be allowed to kill people who have a low IQ? Clearly not. And yet this is the inevitable conclusion of such a line of thinking. From an evolutionary perspective, human beings are not fundamentally different from animals or plants, and consequently, any line of thinking that can justify killing animals or plants can be applied to some group of people, whether it is a particular ethnic group, age group, or gender. See, why we're covering this issue today is it has huge implications for morality, for racism. See, do we have scientific racism? I believe strongly is fueled by this worldview. Many people who embrace it obviously do not always embrace scientific racism, but clearly this issue matters. And if we're creatures made in the image of God, as Genesis describes, he has the rightful authority to set the rules on our behavior and tell us what is good. And laws are intended to protect the weak. And we clearly have a reason to believe that it matters, is in that Jesus said that Genesis 1 matters, as he talks about over and over in the beginning when God created them, male and female. And so Jesus grounded a lot of the authority of his words and the authority that he is God in the flesh, and that he is fulfilling Old Testament scripture. He's fulfilling the promised Messiah that was predicted in Genesis. And that ultimately we see that pain, suffering, and death came into the world through the fall laid out in Genesis 3. And I'll read one more quote by the famous scientist, Dr. Henry Morris. He says, it has often been pointed out that if a person really believes Genesis 1:1, he will not find it difficult to believe anything else in the Bible. That is, if God really created all things, then he controls all things and can do all things. Furthermore, this one verse refutes all of man's false philosophies concerning the origin and meaning of the world. It refutes atheism because the universe was created by God. It refutes pantheism, for God is transcendent to that which he created. It refutes polytheism, meaning many gods, for one God created all things. It refutes materialism, for matter had a beginning. It refutes dualism because God alone was alone when he created. There aren't two good and evil forces that are equal. God is the supreme being, and he has no equal. There is none that can rival him. It refutes humanism because God, not man, is the ultimate reality. It refutes evolutionism because God created all things. So
wow, you really got to preach in there, Caleb.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. This matters, and we need to care. If you're a Christian watching, and if you're a non-believer watching, and you're skeptical about what we're saying and the claims that we're going to be addressing today, this does matter and has huge implications. And so we must engage with the truth today, guys. And so Dr. Jackson is going to get in and look at the textbooks again this morning. We're going to be looking at the textbook's claims on horse evolution, and then we'll be taking questions. So if you're watching on YouTube on our Engage Truth show, or if you're watching on Facebook on our Engage Apologetics page, I want to encourage you to type in your questions in the comments, and we hope to get to those as soon as we can. And as I said, we have several episodes where we'll be here the next 2 Fridays and another Wednesday coming up. And we hope to get to your questions either today or in one of the future episodes. So take it away, Dr. J. I'm glad to have you with us again today.
Well, yeah, I wanted to, the reason I kept getting up and getting back in my seat was I wanted to spin off on some of the stuff that you were talking about. This is a very famous image from the 1930s, 20s and 30s, I believe, on eugenics. I mean, yeah. If you believe that more intelligent people are more highly evolved, the whole eugenics movement really was latched onto by Adolf Hitler, but it was very popular in the United States before World War II, and the Nazi Holocaust gave it such a bad name. And in the spirit of our civil rights issues going on today, I'd like to point out this Dr. Jefferson here, who recently did pass away, but she was a very active person against the eugenics movement for all her life, and a very reputable scientist contributing to the body of scientific knowledge in the world today. And as an African-American woman, first place African-American, second place woman in science, I'm sure it wasn't easy for her, but she still overcame to make great contributions, including contributions against the inevitable conclusion of Darwinism that some are more fit than others in of the favored races, which is the title of Darwin's book, you know. Favored races is part of it. Well, anyway, I thought I'd spin off on what you had said and let people know that, you know, we're not just defending the Bible, but common decency and human decency also. I mean, if we really believe that, you know, the origin of the species by means of natural selection of favored races, and using the word races, not just meaning species by that. I mean, Darwin himself believed that the Caucasian, the Anglo-Saxons, you know, were superior. They were the master race because that was his race or his gene pool. And of course, Hitler believed it was the Teutonic people, you know, the Aryan people that were the master race. And it's a little bit biased, of course. But then it leads to this thinking that that certain races will definitely outcompete others or need to exterminate others. And when you go with atheistic evolution, it does lead to those conclusions, and it really has to by the religion of humanism. Okay, I'm sorry. So now where did you want us to go from here, Brother Caleb?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Of course, this is a big topic of debate, even with news, is we have Planned Parenthood denouncing Margaret Sanger, yet they're still participating in her a lot of her eugenics practices as well. And so this not only has implications for the veracity of God's word from Genesis 1 on, but also has implications as a worldview that's consistent and a worldview that promotes the flourishing of society, which as I've read earlier, the biblical worldview, I believe, promotes the flourishing of society and has a high value for all humans. But if you're consistent with the Darwinian worldview, it is not about that. And so there's many, many reasons why it matters that we address these issues, particularly in the textbook. So let's look at the textbook claims today and address these. And again, I want to encourage you guys, type in your questions or comments in Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll try to get to those today.
Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's see. I'm sharing screen now, so you should see my Calvin and Hobbes cartoon.
All right.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Then we're on. You know, I don't think math is a science. I think it's a religion. A religion? Yeah, all these equations are like miracles. You take two numbers, and when you add them, they magically become one new number. No one can say how it happens. You either believe it or you don't. This whole book is full of things that have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion. And in the public schools, no less. Call a lawyer. As a math atheist, I should be excused from this. So, it's a Calvin and Hobbes on, textbooks and their influence. And so we're back to the PowerPoint presentation on the biology textbook that you're referencing, which is an older edition, which is the newer edition of the one that I was addressing at Butler University some years ago, the 2005 edition. So let's continue. And of course, today's topic is one of the ones that was addressed in this issue of National Geographic in November of 2004. Let's see. Yes, their answer was no, Darwin was not wrong. And they gave several things in this. Now, we already covered homology or homologous structures. We're doing a horse series today from the textbook. It's also one of the big things that this issue of National Geographic said was one of the big proofs of evolution. We already did vestigial organs, and we're going to cover finch beaks later. Okay, so I wanted to show you all images, and probably these are very iconic. A lot of people have probably seen these sort of spreads, often taking up 2 pages in a textbook, left page and right page, of the fabled horse evolution story. This is from the Holt biology textbook, 1994. This one here is from Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston. Let's see, I'm trying to move something around here. Well, okay, I'll try. I'm trying to fix, there we go. All right. Holt Reinhardt, 1989. These things were very common. A lot of people have seen these, and often they have those legs, the leg bones. They always only just show the front leg, because if they show the back leg, it doesn't look as good for evolution. Here's another one from, let's see, yes, that's another college level textbook. The chart it's always there. This is another high school level book. They don't have as much information, but it's still the icon of evolution, of horse evolution. And if you take a look here, let's see, take a look at Herac. Oh my goodness, it's making something I wasn't trying to do. Yes, okay. Herac Aetherium is a, I'll underline it. Eohippus is what they originally, well, not originally, but what they were calling it, because that means dawn horse. Herac Aetherium is the original name by the guy who discovered the fossil. But at any rate, it's conceived of as some sort of a little Bambi-like creature that that eventually turned into the modern horse or equus. And these pictures are very effective at, well, I could say brainwashing, like Charlie Walcott says, or yeah. I think it's just imaging these things to people. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and it certainly does. Now, here is a very well-known biology textbook. I taught out of the 7th edition. I'm now teaching out of the 14th edition. They've had, I think, a 15th edition since then. Inquiry into Life by Sylvia Mader, very well-known basal level college biology textbook. But on page 561 of the 11th edition, it talks about the horse series. And look what it says here. The evolution of the horse should not be viewed as a straight line, like all the pictures say. There were many side branches that became extinct. And they realized that the whole horse story was not this 1-step, 2-step, 3-step, 4-step thing like they were imagining. The fossils didn't support that kind of a story. So they started calling it not a tree, but a bush, not a ladder or stepping stones, but a bush. There were all these many branches. And they've done that with human evolution too. Say, well, it's a lot more complicated than we thought, which means it isn't telling the story as well as they thought. Here's another, and I'm going to come back to this one later, from that Sylvia Mader book, that Herac Aetherium, the ancestor of the modern horse, was about the size of a dog. Keep that in mind, because later evolutionists admitted that that's just not true, and there's no way to prove it either. Now, here's the most popular high school biology textbook in the United States. Now, this is the 2006 edition. I think the new one has a polar bear on it or something, but by Kenneth Miller and Joseph Levine. And let's take a look at what that book says. Again, on page 439, the 2006 edition, it goes on about the horse series. And again, they just show it. Now, they didn't give as much detail. They kind of just, Miller's a smart guy, and he just threw this image up for its visceral content. That's what he said about leaving the embryo pictures in for their visceral effect on the reader. There's not very much detail, but they just say, hey, look at this picture. And it just tells the horse evolution story that people will remember iconically from so many textbooks in the past. Well, okay, let's go ahead and get to the Campbell book. Again, the most recent edition you've got on those little, you've got the cover of that one on those little ads you've been sending out with a kind of a different picture of a flower, a white flower. But let's go ahead and see in the edition that I had done a workup on page 487, there's the horse series. So here in Campbell, and I don't know if it looks the same in the current edition, because this is from the old one. I don't know, does this look familiar to you there, Caleb?
It's about the same. I could hold up mine. It looks about.
Well, and I guess you've got control over the share screen. You could unshare me and share yours.
That's right, yeah. It's about the same.
Let's look at this one first, but I circled the legs for showing that, yeah, they only do the front legs. They don't do the back legs. They always do the front legs because that shows that makes it look more like in favor of evolution. But look at all of those side branches now. They've really modified and complicated the fossil record because it is more complicated. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. It does get. I mean, when you're weaving a fantasy lie, whether you believe that lie or do not, as more data rolls in, you're going to have to complicate your story to accommodate the new evidence. And to their credit, evolutionists really haven't tried to hide the evidence. Textbook publishers have kind of soft-pedaled and downplayed the complexity the story is now running into because, well, textbooks like iconic things like this picture here. I don't know, I'm going to go on to the next thing, but if you want to show the picture, or do you want to just go ahead and go on now, Caleb?
We can go ahead. I can confirm, though, nothing has really changed to my knowledge. Okay.
Well, let's look at some reaction. Well, I've shown you what the books say and verbally have told you some of the you need to know the rest of the story issues. Some older people remember Paul Harvey on the radio. He goes, and now you know the rest of the story. You know, he always used to do his little exposés on things. Well, this is from Jonathan Sarfati, one of the well-known, another Mensa member, I believe, and a world-class chess champion, intelligent guy who wrote this in Creation Ex Nihilo about the horse series. What is the dawn horse? This creature was discovered in 1841 by Richard Owen, one of the leading paleontologists of the day, the inventor of the word dinosaur and a staunch opponent of Darwin. Owen, by the way, was the first curator of the Royal Museum in London and opposed Darwin his entire professional life and was a strong Bible-believing Christian. And yes, he's the one that actually discovered the dawn horse, and he's the one that named it Herac Aetherium because he believed that, well, it comes from a reference in the Bible. Owen saw no connection with the horse, but thought it was very like the modern-day hyrax, that is, a rock badger or a coney. Now, referring to rabbit-like creatures as conies has become more recognizable in American culture now ever since Samwise Gamgee referred to rabbits as conies in the movie, played by Sean Astin. So he named it Herac Aetherium. Other fossils of the same type of creature were later named Eohippus, the dawn horse, by more evolutionary-minded paleontologists, more evolutionary-minded than Dr. Richard Owen. In northeastern Oregon, the three-toed Neohipparian and the one-toed Pleohippus were found in the same lair, which meant they lived at the same time. They weren't stair steps. As one evolutionary professor said, in applying this to the human evolution, fossil finds that contradicted the stair step family tree story. I'll go ahead and quote him. It's like finding out that your grandmother and your great-grandmother were really sisters and weren't in a family tree hierarchy spanning many generations. They all lived at the same time. So if Neohipparian and Pleohippus were in the same lair with Eohippus, then they were all contemporaries. They were non-sequenced. They can't be put in a family tree, one leading from one to the other and one to the other and one to the other. Okay, well, let's go on here. Now, this is a quote from 1953 by George Gaylord Simpson of Harvard, I believe. I think he was a Nobel Prize winning scientist. He was Stephen Jay Gould's mentor. And look at what Dr. Simpson said in 1953. The uniform continuous transformation of Herac Aetherium into Equus, so dear to the hearts of textbook writers, never happened in nature. As early as the early 1950s, evolutionists were recognizing and admitting these little series that are in all the textbooks that everybody loves so much, they just weren't true. Enough evidence had been found, they already knew. Here's the next year in Sweden, and it's translated. Look at what it says. The family tree of the horse is beautiful and continuous only in the textbooks. In the reality provided by the results of research, it is put together from three parts, of which only the last can be described as including horses. The construction of the horse is therefore a very artificial one, since it is put together from non-equivalent parts and cannot therefore be a continuous transformation series. Professional evolutionists were knocking those pictures in the textbooks way earlier than now, as you and I are doing it. Here you go, 1979. This is a quote from David Routh, the curator of geology at the Chicago Field Museum of Natural History, from the Field Museum's Natural History Bulletin in 1979. Now, the Field Museum is named after a guy named Field, so it's not really talking that they're out in the field, doing their, just so you get the museum. I've been to that museum. It's quite a big one and very well known. But look at 1979 from the bulletin of that museum, from an article called Conflicts Between Darwin and Paleontology, in other words, fossils. Well, we are now about 120 years after Darwin, and knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. Ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. Well, how is that possible? Let's read on. By this, I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as the evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded. Oh, gee, Caleb, what's a synonym for discarded?
Thrown away.
Thrown away or modified as a result of what? More detailed information. You know, bad thinking in science, bad models, bad theories, bad mental models can exist only when there's a sparsity of data. People used to think that the sun went around the earth. Well, from here, it looks like that. And so, until we got more data, we went with that. But more data in the hands of honest researchers, honest theoreticians, honest scientists, honest theologians, more data, more information, more truth that everyone can agree upon forces you to reevaluate and change and even discard your ideas. It was Dr. Gary Parker who I heard say that evolution thrives in the absence of data. It flourishes in the gray areas, in the shadows. But when more data comes in, when more light, of course, is brought in by new discoveries, that's when evolutionists have to backpedal and do a little double speak and double time to keep throwing the bilge water out so the boat doesn't sink. Well, look at what he continues to say. What appeared to be a nice, simple progression when relatively few data were available now appears to be a much more complex and less gradualistic story. And so this is what has happened and why in 1979 this backpedaling was necessary. Well, let's look at the next one here. Let's see. Yeah. So here's just a little sketch of some of the problems. The Eohippus, or the Herac Aetherium, had 4 toes and 18 ribs. The Orohippus had 3 toes and 15 ribs. The Merychippus, 3 toes and 19 ribs. Just keeps changing, going up and down as evolution goes. The Pliohippus, 1 toe and 19 ribs. And Equus, or the modern horse, 1 toe as a hoof and 18 ribs. Now, according to Dollo's law of evolution, and we'll see this later, once evolution evolves and by mutation and natural selection creates a complex structure, it shouldn't uncreate it as long as it has a use. And so that wreaks havoc with this sequence here too. These are always arranged in an order, but they're not found in that same order in the fossil stratigraphic layers. 2 of these animals have only been found in Europe, not North America, in this particular list here. By the way, I owe this particular PowerPoint frame to John Hefner in near Longview, Texas. And he's actually kind of the East Texas creationist and a good buddy of mine. I've worked with him many times and love him and his wife, Marvelyn, and my wife and I have palled around with them in ministry and just in friend situations. But anyway, thanks to John for making that slide. Let's see.
Hey, Dr. J, while you're pulling that up, so yeah. I know a lot of people will still look at that and they may say, well, look, I'm looking at page 530 on this biology textbook, and it's like, well, there's descent with modification, there's change. So if they're just defining it vaguely like that, they may say, well, there's been change, so isn't that evolution? But we're looking, the macroevolution story needs something in particular, right? Can you expand on that?
Well, don't forget that we just read the quote that the dawn horse, Eohippus, Orohippus, Merychippus, and Pliohippus, they all lived at the same time anyway. Even though they were on different parts of the world, they couldn't be a stepping, descent with modification. These did not descend from each other any more than you descended from me because we were in different places, or than my all of my aunts and uncles descended from each other. They certainly did not. They were contemporaries like these. But I know what you're getting at. The whole machinery of how evolution is supposed to work is that accidental copying errors in the base pairs in the DNA from generation to generation, in other words, a mutation, makes a slight change. And then if that change is actually beneficial, then survival of the fittest or natural selection will give it a better chance of surviving than individuals who don't have the mutation. And so by little gradual increments, micro evolutions, you might call them, then these slight changes are retained and the bad ones are discarded, and you just save the good, and over millions and millions of years, it'll just get better and better. But this assumes some pretty big things, like that the small mutation is great enough to confer an actual measurable survival advantage to the organism. It has to survive and all its friends have to die in order for the trait to become widespread in the species. Also, it assumes that an accidental copying error actually has a shot, at creating a new part of the DNA, a new gene that actually is better than the old one, or provides a new alternate function that the old one didn't have, that's actually conferring survival advantage. Well, both of these assumptions are way out there. It's wishful, hopeful thinking. And the reason why evolutionists look at all these fossils and line them up in these orders, even though they weren't in those orders, they didn't even come from the same areas of the earth, is because, well, it fits the story. It makes the story look better. And that's what politicians do, don't they? They cherry pick the kinds of things they want highlighted in the news and stuff. And we're in a political year right now for sure. And so it's hard to believe almost anything anybody says, especially if they're running for any office. And this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get evolution to get all the votes by people, and it intimidates people who aren't in the scientific community. So that's what you and I are doing here, Caleb, is, building up our brothers and sisters in their most holy faith and giving an answer to any man that asks with meekness and with fear. But I am trying to be meek about this, but it's kind of hard when I know that my brothers and sisters are being bullied by people who say stuff like this makes sense. And of course, it really doesn't.
Right. No, that was so helpful. I appreciate that. I had several people ask their friends or family member questions before this live stream in case they couldn't participate. And I said, text your friends and family and ask them, do you believe in evolution and why? And of course, we got one person say, well, don't you? We are evolving. Humans are getting taller and less hairy, was the response. Which it sounds like that's equivocating too, that because there's any type of change, it must mean the grand story of macroevolution must be true as well.
Well, the hairy thing is so ridiculous. I mean, we don't have Neanderthal hair. We don't know if humans were hairier. All of those artist conceptions of, Lucy, the Australopithecus, Afarensis, and all those other, extinct, and Neanderthals, they have to use their imagination to do the hair. All we got is the bones. We don't have anything else.
Yeah.
And so they don't know that people in the past were hairier. I mean, what about hairy people today? Are they less evolved? Maybe they should be killed by us smoother skinned people. And I don't know. If you got chest hair, maybe, if you're a dude, you got chest hair. Well, nowadays, never mind. Does that mean you're less evolved, that you're a horrible a throwback and we should just eugenics you out of the gene pool so that people can become, better? Well, anyway, let me go back to my, are we ready to go back to the PowerPoint?
It's helpful to think through because ideas have consequences is the clear thing we're getting at.
That's the whole thing. Ideas do have consequences. When Sergei Korotkov wrote his book, The Persecutor, about his testimony of going from someone who persecuted Christians in I think it was 1960s and 70s Russia, and later he became a Christian. He said he was taught it's what people believe that matters. They didn't call the Christians they were persecuting Christians. They called them believers, because their superiors said it's what people believe that determines what they do and how they think about everything else in their life, not what they, say and what we call them, but it's what they believe. So they called Christians believers. And I think that guy was right. Okay, let's keep on going about what we believe about these horses and everything. All right. So Stephen Jay Gould said this in 1980 about the horse series in the books. He said, the popularly told example of horse evolution, suggesting a gradual sequence of changes from four-toed fox-sized creatures living nearly 50 million years ago to today's much larger one-toed horse, has long been known to be what, Caleb? Oh, read it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So you're talking about this top one here?
Yeah, wrong. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, not to be wrong. Yeah. Sorry, I was checking the comment section.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, you were distracted there by that. But I mean, I'm a teacher, so I do fill in the blank questions.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's
choral response. Instead of a gradual change, fossils of each of the intermediate species appear fully distinct, persist unchanged, and then they become extinct. Transitional forms are unknown. And I love Stephen Jay Gould for his honesty. I mean, he really was militantly against creationists. He was a professed atheist, but he was a good watchdog over the evolutionist community because he was honest. He said, look, guys, the creationists are making fun of us for this stuff. We got to dump it quick, and we got to keep our ducks in order, because they'll spot it and they'll tell the public. And he was very good about I also got to hear him speak on the Lucy fossil once at George Mason University, where I got 3 of my degrees. And I thought he was a very good speaker. And I really appreciated him. He was an enemy that I really admired and respected for his dignity, for his teaching and speaking ability, and for his integrity, his honesty. I mean, he fought against us tooth and nail, but he would call his own peers out on stuff like this and say, guys, we've got to stop doing this. The creationists are taking advantage of it. So I appreciated that he would do that sort of thing. He didn't think this should be in the books, obviously.
Yeah.
Look what he says in an article in 2000, 20 years later, in Natural History called Abscheulich, which means atrocious in German. He says, once ensconced in the textbooks, misinformation becomes cocoon and effectively permanent, because textbooks copy from previous texts. I have written 2 essays on this lamentable practice. One on the amusingly perennial description of the Eohippus or dawn horse as the size of a fox terrier, even though most authors, including yours truly, have no idea of the dimensions or appearance of this breed. And remember what I said, that book that I once taught, well, I'm teaching out of now, the 14th edition, that book, a college level biology textbook, says this: Herac Aetherium, which is also Eohippus, the ancestor of the modern horse, was about the size of a dog. And that's 2000 that Stephen Jay Gould said this. And I'm trying to remember what year. I know it was like in the 2010s when I was teaching out of that one there. So, I mean, there's a lot that's in the textbooks that we know is not right. Yeah. And the evolutionists know is not right. And many evolutionists honestly think we've got to get it out of the books, but it just persists. And take a look at what it does say here. Let me see if I can get my little drawing tools ready here. Yeah, it not only talks about the Herac Aetherium here, but now it goes down here, and we already found out about the Miocene and Pliocene things. The grasslands began to replace the forests. Now they're giving a rationale for why evolution did what it did. But we're going to see a quote in a couple minutes here literally from the guy who wrote the book on horse evolution, saying that what's at the bottom there just is not true. Okay, now let's go on. Here, this is on horse evolution. It's from the Talk Origins archive. Talk Origins is the place on the internet where creationists and evolutionists go to fight, but it's usually the creationist is outnumbered 50-1 by evolutionists. So look what this evolutionist said. Many horse species were usually present at the same time, with various numbers of toes, adapted to various different diets. In other words, horse evolution had no inherent direction. We only have the impression of straight line evolution because only one genus happens to still be alive, today, which deceives some people into thinking that one genus was somehow the target of all evolution. Instead, that one genus is merely the last surviving branch of a once mighty and sprawling bush, which I'll say is a complicated bush. I'll also invoke Stephen Jay Gould's left wall hypothesis about this target evolution thing. Gould was appalled that many evolutionists thought that evolution had something in mind. It's a mindless copying error sequence process and not trying to get anywhere. He said his left wall hypothesis was, I think, very clever and clear thinking. He said it's like a drunk stumbling home from the bar, and he's walking on the sidewalk, and on the left of him is a wall. He keeps bumping into the wall and staggering away from the wall, and then staggering more to the right. And we consider that progress. No, it's that there's nowhere to go but right. And it gives the impression, since for evolution, there's no way to go from bacteria but more complex, it gives the illusion that evolution is trying to make more complex organisms. And Gould was appalled at that kind of thinking. He knew it was irrational, and it made all evolutionists look like, well, people who had faith instead of rationale for their scientific theories. And so that target thing that's really, she would have gotten along well with Stephen Jay Gould in talking about that left wall hypothesis. Now here's the guy I mentioned, Bruce McFadden. Look at the bottom citation. He wrote the book in 1992, Fossil Horses, Systematics, Paleobiology, and Evolution of the Family Equidae. This guy literally wrote the book on horse evolution in 1992. And look at what he said, I think working with the Florida Museum of Natural History in 2005. The preconceived notion that the horse was once as small as a dog, but progressively grew to its present stature, now can be proven to be what, Caleb? Oh, you're still
be
reading.
Proven to be incorrect.
There you go, read it. Incorrect.
Yeah.
During the Miocene epoch, and that textbook just mentioned Miocene and Pliocene, the Miocene epoch, horses diversified in size. Some grew larger, others became smaller. Cope's law states that the descendants of a species grow increasingly larger. And that's a law in evolution theory. It's funny how a theory can have a law within it, but that's what they do. Cope's law says descendants grow larger. But you have to ask, how many exceptions to the rule can you accept before the central concept is no longer correct? And I wish that Dr. McFadden would apply that thinking to the entire evolutionary posit rather than just to the horse series that's in all of the textbooks. And Dollo's law is the one in evolution that says that complex structures can't unevolve once evolution has gone to the trouble to evolve them. Both of these laws really come within the category of a theory, really a hypothesis. And so, but I'm glad that McFadden said this. Again, that's 2005. That's pretty recent. And I think it's pretty clear now that your modern thinking evolutionists believe that this horse thing that's in all the textbooks is an embarrassing thing to them, and they're trying to get rid of it.
Yeah, well, and it's like I said, this is in the textbook that students are using right now in El Paso.
There it is, and there it is. There's that
misleading
Campbell book right there. And it's there now. And it should be frustrating to evolutionists. It's frustrating to me as a creationist. It's frustrating to me as a science teacher. I mean, I've been teaching science for 40 years now. I started teaching science on the high school level in 1980. I was going to say 40 because I had the number 40 stuck in my head. And I've been teaching on the college and high school level ever since. Biology, chemistry. I mean, I'm teaching advanced dual enrollment biology now. And I have 2 degrees in biology. And I mean, I've been frustrated by things that, as Gould called it, misinformation that's cocooned in the textbooks. And that's what we're really talking about. This is just so iconic in the textbooks, they just can't get it out. And we'll end this with another Calvin cartoon. Aren't you supposed to be doing your homework? I'm pretty sure the assignment was optional. Denial springs eternal. It's not denial, I'm just very selective about the reality I accept. And so are those textbook publishers. They're very selective about what they're going to put in their books. Despite the cries of creationists and even evolutionists, they're leaving those pictures in the books because, as Kenneth Miller says, the visceral effect that it has in favor of evolution on the mind of the reader. And there's that contact information again, and my Facebook page, and the Facebook page is Points of Origins with a S at the end. And if you kind of looked it up on the internet, you used to go to an acupuncture website if you didn't get Points of Origins, or you went to a travel agency. So make sure you pluralize both of those. Okay, let me see. I think that's the end of that. Let me go ahead and return control of your screen to you, as they said on the old Outer Limits episodes there. Okay, so Brother Caleb, where are we at now? And I think you've got some comments and questions, and we still have 10 minutes of our official time left, and half an hour
got some
added to that for some discussion and Q&A.
Got some time for questions for sure. And again, I want to make sure everybody will type their questions in the Facebook comment section or on YouTube. And so a few times he caught me checking just to make sure we're keeping up with people, or I'll post an article if they want.
Somebody has to keep track of that, and that's you.
Yes. Yeah. I did get a message of a question. I'll go ahead and read it here. And it says, let me see. Are we saying that there is no evolution of animals at all, and that every animal that has changes in features wasn't because of evolution, but because God created him that way?
Okay, well, I'm glad that they asked that, because I used the word microevolution earlier. And like the fact that, some humans have blue eyes and some humans have brown eyes, and some moths are in the same species are black, and some of them are white. And we're talking about Biston betullaria, the peppered moth in England. The idea that, let's say 100 years from now, more people are redheaded, that there's more redheads in the human population than there is now. And evolutionists would say, look, that's change over time. That's change in the frequency of the red-haired gene. So gene frequency has changed. That's our definition of evolution. Now, in the last week of all of this series, we'll talk about how Darwin's finches and the moths and things like that, that's just natural selection, and it's sort of genetic drift. It's not evolution. It's micro variation would be a better word for it. All you're doing there is reshuffling the deck of the cards. Red-haired DNA exists in humans now. Red-haired gene exists now, as does brunette and blonde, hair. And strawberry blonde, my youngest daughter is a strawberry blonde by nature. And just because there are more redheads, in the future doesn't mean that evolution happened. For real evolution to happen, you don't need a greater distribution of the redheaded gene. You need a new hair color to evolve. You need a newer body integument than hair to evolve, just like when those lizards changed their scales into hair and into feathers for birds and hair for mammals. Yeah, that's what you need. Their story, like the lizards gave rise to birds and mammals story, needs for evolution to write new DNA for new genes for new traits. You can't just have these little teeny weeny changes that could happen just by reshuffling the deck and dealing out a new hand of gene cards every generation. You can't just have a mix and match of pre-existing genes. You've got to generate new genes. Now, I've had evolutionists get mad at me for saying that's such a big demand. But bacteria are, of course, supposed to be our cousins, and the original archaeobacters are our ancestors, and bacteria just don't have the DNA for the human brain. But so somehow evolution needed to not just do the origin of the species, but the origin of the family, the phyla, the kingdoms. It had to originate all of these things. And the only way to do it is copying errors, making new DNA with new genes for new traits, new information, and all of these gradual little changes like the question mentioned. That's not even microevolution. It's microvariation on the same theme. I don't like calling it microevolution because it implies that's little evolution, and then macroevolution is big evolution. I had one creationist say to me, and I like this example, microevolution is really saying like this. You see a bunch of birds on a telephone pole wire, and they're all standing there, and then they fly up in the air and fly up higher than the wire, and you go, all you have to do is extrapolate that and imagine, and birds could not just fly 50 feet higher in the air, they could get to the moon. You see? There is a limit to how high those birds can fly, and there's a limit to how much microevolution can change a gene pool, not just a species or a genus or a family, which is probably the kind level is probably at the family, because Canis lupus and Canis familiaris are actually not two different species. Canis lupus being the wolf and Canis familiaris being the dog. We know they can breed together. They're in the same kind, reproducing after their kind. They're in genus Canis, but they're also both under family Canidae, and that's probably the level. Well, what I'm trying to say is just these minor changes, just because birds can fly 50 feet higher doesn't mean they can fly to the moon. There's something that gets in the way of that. And just because we can see variation in a chimpanzee population doesn't mean they're going to be able to get out of the chimpanzee atmosphere and gravitational pull of Planet of the Apes. Hey, I just made that up. And get to the human planet. They can't. There are limits to this. How much just a mix and match of existing DNA can get you, how far it can get you, and how far copying errors can get you. Evolutionists still refer to this as Haldane's dilemma. In the 1930s, a biologist named J.S. Haldane calculated and guesstimated, and they still agree with his guesstimation, how many mutations it would take for a chimpanzee to turn into a human, and he guesstimated 1,667. Then they guesstimated how many years you'd need, and it's way more than the 6 or 7 million years you'd need, or they guesstimated that we would have to get from humans to from monkeys to humans, and they still call it Haldane's dilemma. In other words, evolution just can't, even by mutation and natural selection, can't manage to accumulate enough mutations fast enough for the story of living things to have happened. Not even the story of chimps to people in the time it's allotted in their story. Well, anyway, I hope that helped get the difference between evolution and natural selection. There's no such thing as microevolution, just variation within the kind.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think that one of the key issues here is that it's the equivocation of terms itself, that variation or speciation, and as I mentioned with that quote from someone saying, well, of course evolution's happening. You see differences among people. And I think it's equivocating what we mean by evolution, but we're saying this, but they actually mean something else. And they're saying it plays into the grand story. But they're also making assumptions that the biblical narrative doesn't allow for changes, right?
Yeah, well, the biblical narrative does allow for changes.
Right.
I mean, you can see it when Jacob was breeding those was it goats or sheep? A sheep he was trying to get from Laban. I mean, you can see that people have been trying to, and it's recorded in the Bible in that case, but people have been trying to breed, better livestock and herds, and later we're trying to pollinate, plants for better and all of that, and taking the seeds from the best and juiciest peach trees, and we've been doing artificial selection. Humans have been selecting for the best things all along, and so people could be taller now than before because of nutrition. It could be because of natural selection. Maybe hairier or less hairier, that might be natural selection, but people are still people. Dogs are still dogs. No matter how much you breed and breed and breed bacteria, in all these little evolutionary experiments, they still stay bacteria. They don't become anything else. And no matter how much Darwin was breeding those pigeons, they didn't become something new. They were still pigeons and interfertile with each other unless you inbred them too much, and so on. So fixity of kinds is true. Now kinds can go extinct. The dodo bird is extinct now. The rhodocetus is extinct. The dinosaur, order Dinosauria, under class Reptilia, they're all extinct now. But during the time that a kind exists, they can change due to adapting and natural selection, bottleneck effects, founder effects, genetic drift. But it's all a reshuffling and an elimination and a reshuffling of cards that are all dealt from the same deck the week of creation. And any copying errors or changes in the nucleotide sequence or the nucleotides that are present, insertions, deletions, substitutions, all of that, copying errors and all, any changes break down the system. They don't actually build up new information. That's the myth of evolution, though, that copying errors can create new information on the scale of lizards becoming you and me. And that's just imagining, you see. In that little video, God versus Evolution, I love what that one evolutionist lady said. She said, well, people who reject evolution, they just lack imagination. And that's really true. That's Barney the dinosaur. Let's use our imagination, and if you just believe in fairies, like in Peter Pan, if you believe in fairies, Tinkerbell will get well if you clap your hands. If you believe in fairies, then clap your hands. If you believe in evolution, just keep having the faith, and that's all it is. I don't criticize people for having faith. There are many, many things we have to have faith for. In Christianity, we have to have faith, but you also have to have faith in the people who installed the electric wires in your house, that they did that right. Sure. We do faith all the time. You're having faith that Zoom's actually going to work well. And oh, by the way, Caleb asked me to use the headset today because Zoom was giving us an echo, or at least somebody's computer was echoing, and so I had these and put them on. But we have faith in a lot of things. Evolutionists have faith. What the problem comes is when you actually claim your faith is based on data and rational, logical, step-by-step, scientific method thinking, and then new data comes up, like all those horse fossils, like Dr. Raup said, new fossils, new information has made it more complicated than we thought, which means it's actually getting worse. And when we used to believe that the sun went around the earth, new data was coming in, and they had troubles. The retrograde motion of Mars really contradicted the geocentric model of the solar system. So they made up this new theory called epicycles, where some planets just make little curlicues, like the icing on the top of a Hostess cupcake. They make these little curlicues called epicycles, and the main orbit was called the deferent. And they just made up all these really complicated things to somehow still believe in geocentrism for the solar system model. And when a theory is ready to die, or is a sign of death, which happened centuries before geocentrism really did die, it begins to become way more complicated by many secondary assumptions, many more presumptions, and a convoluted just stream of a panic-stricken effort to bring in more models and changes to the model and exceptions to rules, and it just is an avalanche, a domino effect of many efforts on many researchers' parts to try to compensate for the obvious elephant in the room that's a finger pointing at your theory saying it needs to be discarded now, and they won't do it. So they hang on. Geocentrism hung on long after the retrograde motion of Mars was observed, not till Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler proved that after Copernicus, a Polish monk, an avowed Christian, and Kepler was a Christian. Brahe was not, but it was Brahe's data that Kepler used to prove the heliocentric model, that the Earth actually goes around the sun, which the Bible has no conflict with that, and even espouses it in some places outside of common thinking and analogical thinking. Well, anyway, I kind of went off there a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, as I think really thinking about the model and the presuppositions that people have to begin with, and what I mean by presupposition, meaning you're presupposing something is true already, and so that ends up being the case, then you're going to interpret the data in light of that framework. And I think I heard Charlie say one time, everything is evidence for evolution when you presuppose that it's true.
Yeah, there was one evolutionist, I think it was Richard Lewontin, said that this kind of thinking, and he was admitting a real truth in science. He said, it's an old theory in science that we need to remember. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that same guy, Lewontin, he said we can't allow a divine foot in the door because our presuppositions to materialism, or he said something to that effect.
Yeah, there are two names that sound very similar to each other. I'm getting,
good. Okay,
one is Lowen and one is Lewontin.
Oh,
and I think maybe I was Richard Lewontin and Robert Lowen. Well, at any rate, they're two separate guys, but yeah, both of those are evolutionists who have said those kinds of things and cautions.
Yeah, and you also got me thinking on the presupposition that, okay, well, we know evolution's true because the experts have said so, and I know you've addressed that and you will continue to in future episodes, that how could we be wrong? And so the appeal is appeal to the expert, which is a logical fallacy, that something could be true just because an expert, quote unquote, says. You have to measure, does it correspond to reality? And that's, philosophically speaking, that's what truth is that which corresponds to reality. And of course, this changing of a paradigm, it becomes difficult, as you said, with the debate between heliocentrism or geocentric views. And then you have all these rescuing devices. And I thought, wow, like that is what we're seeing today. I think there was an article in 2004 said the Big Bang is broken, and we're not going to dive real deep into that today. If you want to, you can again look at my episode with Dr. Jason Lyle, and we really dived into the Big Bang. But there's a lot of rescuing devices like inflation and many other things to try to explain the old universe itself. And you have a lot of problems with the model itself, of the secular naturalistic model of the origin of the universe. Like you mentioned some things in the past, Venus rotates clockwise. That doesn't fit the model of everything should be rotating the same direction, is my understanding, right? And then
I mean, if the accretionary disk and the nebula theory of the origin of our solar system is true, yeah, everything should actually be going. And so they have to make up some ways that these exceptions could actually have happened.
yeah, exactly. Well, and there's many things, and I've mentioned before is magnetic field decay. You really need to again listen to that episode with Dr. Lyle. But we have Jupiter. It's still too hot. It releases twice the energy it receives from the sun, and planets gradually cool as they radiate heat into space. And Jupiter is large enough to do this for thousands of years. However, if it was really billions of years old, it should have cooled by now. And so to automatically assume that the universe is billions of years old and the Earth is millions of years old, without taking into consideration these issues, that is showing it's really about the presuppositions that you're presupposing this worldview framework is already true. And if you're like, well, what about this? What about this? We are going to look in future episodes on dinosaurs and human evolution as well. And we don't have time to get into every single issue of what abouts today, but we do have some time to get to some different questions related to what we covered today. And let me check the comment section here.
Caleb, do you mind if I share screen again for
yeah, go ahead.
And Lowen?
Well,
yeah, I did. I didn't find the exact quotes, but I found the guys and two additional quotes that I think are fun. This is the guy who, and I don't think anyone would, I mean, I can find the exact quote later if people want me to, but this is the guy who said, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. But here he's talking about how natural selection can't create anything. So that's Roger Lewin, who said that I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. And he was talking about the Flipperithecus fossil that Tim White found, and they thought it was a dolphin rib, but they thought it was a human collarbone. So they cheerfully named it Flipperithecus just to be funny. and that was an example of Tim White's good sense of humor. He made fun of himself for that, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
He's the guy who made the Ardipithecus ramidus fossil very famous, Tim White at Berkeley. And let's see. Oh, my screen sharing has stopped. Let me share screen one more thing. And
sure,
this is the other guy. And this is the guy who said, who you were talking about, who said we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. This is Richard Lowington. And he is saying also here another thing about the problems of evolution. But he was also the one that said we cannot allow a divine foot in the door.
Oh, right, exactly.
So it is two different guys.
Yeah, their names do sound familiar.
Yeah, they do, and I'm always getting them confused. Okay.
Very similar names.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so let me go. I have a question, a comment, because I was going around asking people, can you tell me what you believe and why in regards to evolution? And here's one comment I got from someone last night. They said, well, what evidence is there that a population of organisms can, over the course of many generations, develop into two distinct populations that are unable to crossbreed? This question, which is pretty much what most people the word evolution, has a pretty easy and clear response. To this question, I can point you to numerous examples or even recommend that you Google observe instances of speciation to read more about the subject in far more detail than I can provide. I can point you to ring species where geographically contiguous populations are known, where interbreeding takes place along the entire chain, but for which no interbreeding is possible among the species at either end.
Okay, for instance, ring speciation of warblers on the Tibetan plateau is one of the ones that you'll hear a lot about. And speciation, even many creationists are now using the word speciation. As I've mentioned before, the use of the word species is now become so gray area. Let me just hit right to the question, though. If a population of a particular species or kind gets separated from another group of the same kind, the inbreeding that goes on can begin to have deleterious effects on the genome, eventually to the point that they're less viable. But all the mutations that occur in these two separate populations are accommodated by the genetic recombination mechanisms of this group. But they have different mutations than this group does. For instance, with horses, they might actually have different numbers of chromosomes. And now horses are very tolerant of that and can recombine. But in many species, they can't do that. Once you have a different number of chromosomes, it's difficult. We know that horses can breed with donkeys to make mules. And mules are usually not, I don't even know if they're ever fertile. Lions can breed with tigers and make ligers. And again, I haven't heard, I think I've heard that ligers can be fertile, but I mean, if they can breed with each other, their DNA is similar enough, they were once the same kind. But if they actually get off by themselves and the mutations are just so great in this group and so great in this group that and the chromosome number might have changed by fusions or fissions of chromosomes in accidental reproductive meiosis and fertilization happenings, then the two could become infertile. But saying that the inability to breed means a new species has occurred, if that's your definition of species, fine. Then anyone with a vasectomy has become a new species. I really, no, seriously, this is the kind of reasoning, I'm sorry, but we gotta dash this kind of stuff down to the rocks where it belongs. You know, really, if something new evolved, show me a warbler bird that doesn't just have a few bones in a little bit of a different place and a few feather patterns that are different. Show me a bird that evolved into something that's, I don't know, got jet engines on it. Or show me a lizard that changed its scales into feathers instead of these little micro variation things. It's still dealing cards from the same deck, but now we've got some cards missing from the old deck that we used many generations ago. And this group has some cards missing, but these have different ones missing. And when they try to recombine the deck, the two decks, it doesn't work anymore. Not because we're going onto this grand, bigger and bigger, greater and greater evolution thing. Evolution still has to do the show me the money and show that these two species that came out of the ring speciation has somehow got new DNA with new traits they didn't have before, new genes that didn't exist that are actually better in some way. It doesn't even have to be better, it just has to be new. It has to be new genetic information they didn't have before. You know, then I'd believe. You know, but if ring speciation, what actually happens in ring speciation is evolution, then I believe. But it's not good. That process that is described in every example of ring speciation, whether it's with salamanders or birds or anything, frogs, allopatric, you know, any of that kind of thing, that process cannot get you from fish to amphibians to reptiles to mammals. It can't, because you still have the problem of show me the money, show me a new gene that that heads in that direction and did not exist before. None of that happens in ring speciation ever. It just doesn't. You don't see new genes with new DNA with new traits that didn't exist before. Only variations, maybe variations in gene expression. And that's not evolution either, because you don't have a new gene, you're just expressing it more or less, like the Pt.2 gene that controls our brain development in all different species in mammals. We just see it expressed more or less. And there's only 2 amino acids different in a like a 500 amino acid long, at least 500 amino acid long sequence in monkeys and humans in the FOXP2 gene. And even the guy who studied that, Svante Pabo, said that's not enough to make our brain 3 times larger than a chimpanzee's brain. something else must be going on. But it certainly, it certainly isn't anything that ring speciation could accomplish, or any kind of speciation, or things that like natural selection could accomplish, or mutations could accomplish. I mean, these are theoretical constructs, and that's nice, and they're based on a lot of assumptions and a model. But when we actually go to look in the genetic information we've got from different species, we never see it happen. Like the immunity of certain strains of bacteria to our new antibiotic drugs, that has never been observed to happen either, not by a Darwinian process.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for explaining that right there then. So another issue I wanted to get to, if we have time, if not, we can postpone looking at it, is we have in the biology textbook here, and I know I sent you pictures of that section, right before the horse evolution section, they actually, I think my understanding is they're responding to creationist arguments that would say it's difficult or near impossible that the eye could evolve. And so they say in here, it's a little bit of a long quote here, but I'll go ahead and read it. And if you want to respond, he says, Jacob's view of evolution harkens back to Darwin's concept of descent with modification. As new species form, novel and complex structures can arise as gradual modifications of ancestral structures. In many cases, complex structures have evolved in increments from simpler versions that perform the same basic function. For example, consider the human eye, an intricate organ constructed from numerous parts that work together in forming an image and transmitting it to the brain. How could the human eye have evolved in gradual increments? Some argue that if the eye needs all its components to function, a partial eye would not have been of use to our ancestors. The flaw in this argument, as Darwin himself noted, lies in the assumption that only complicated eyes are useful. In fact, many animals depend on eyes that are far less complex than our own. The simplest eyes that we know of are patches of light-sensitive photoreceptor cells. These simple eyes appear to have had a single evolutionary origin and are now found in a variety of animals, including small mollusks called limpets. Such eyes have no equipment for focusing images, but they do enable the animal to distinguish light from dark. Limpets cling more tightly to their rock when a shadow falls on them, a behavioral adaptation that reduces the risk of being eaten. Because limpets have had a long evolutionary history, we can conclude that their simple eyes are quite adequate to support their survival and reproduction. In the animal kingdom, complex eyes have evolved independently from such basic structures many times. Some mollusks, such as squids and octopuses, have eyes as complex as those of humans and other vertebrates. Although complex mollusk eyes evolved independently of vertebrate eyes, both evolved from a simple cluster of photoreceptor cells present in a common ancestor. In each case, the complex eye evolved through a series of incremental modifications that benefited the eye's owners at every stage. Evidence of their independent evolution also be found in their structure. Vertebrate eyes detect light at the back layer of the retina and conduct nerve impulses toward the front, while complex mollusk eyes do the reverse. Throughout their evolutionary history, eyes retain their basic function of vision, but evolutionary novelties can also arise when structures that originally played one role gradually acquire a different one. For example, cynodonts gave rise to early mammals. Bones that formerly comprised the jaw hinge were incorporated into the ear region of mammals, where they eventually took on a new function, the transmission of sound. Structures that evolve in one context but become co-opted for another function are sometimes called exaptations to distinguish them from the adaptive origin of the original structure. Note the concept of can't say that word right, sorry, does not imply that a structure somehow evolves in anticipation of future use. Natural selection cannot predict the future. It can only improve a structure in the context of its current utility. Novel features such as new jaw hinge and ear bones of early mammals can arise gradually via a series of intermediate stages, each of which has some function in the organism's current context. So it's
Okay,
page.
now we did start a little late, so do I have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to address this?
Yeah, you can do 10 minutes. That's fine.
Okay.
And I know it's a longer quote, but I
Yeah.
wanted to read their context so people won't say you misquoted them. It's on page 529 and 530 of the biology.
Well,
textbook.
it went through. Now this co-opting thing is how evolutionists get around irreducible complexity, or how a complex structure needs all of its parts in place all at once at the same time for it to work. So they get into this co-opted thing, and it's logical, but it's very theoretical, and it's an after the fact, post hoc explanation. In that now they said, oh, we know of all these different living things that have little light sensing spots all the way up to the human eye. Those things all exist today. And according to the creation model, they were all created the same week of the world. And they've been that same way ever since. And what they're doing now is they're lining all these things up in an order and saying one gave rise to the other. Because there are many, many different created kinds of all different levels of complexity, what you do is you cherry pick and then make an artificial arrangement and line them up in an artificial order from simple to complex and say, I can line these up today. That's how it happened in history. There was a time the only thing that had eyes were these simple light sensing cells on the face of a limpet or something. And that's a story. That's a story. This is, and it starts out saying, and I took a couple of notes, we know these things can arise. Well, why? Because you say so. We know many have developed. Why? Only if you know that your story is true. You know what? In a court of law, I'd have to cross-examine. What do you mean? It can arise. Okay, that's if evolution's true. But now you're saying it has. You're going from it can happen to it did happen. You're saying many have developed. Now, we're not just hypothesizing, we're lying. Because we don't know when we say stuff like that. We know of all these different kinds of eyes we know of appear to have a common evolutionary they appear to have a common evolutionary origin. Well, according to them, you and I appear to have a common evolutionary origin to an oak tree. Carl Sagan said so on the Cosmos series. I saw him. It appears only if the evolution story's right. So they're really not only appealing to authorities, they're appealing to the model to prove the model. And I'm sorry, that's really, really bad thinking. But when you are thinking this way and you wanna, and so many people are thinking this way and they wanna, and they all talk to each other in this, we want this to be true way, little things like supporting evidence that doesn't depend on each other just gets lost in the shuffle. It also said that that complex eyes have evolved many times. Okay, actually they were created the same week. Many different complex eyes were, and that's my faith. That's my model. I might not be able to prove that to them, but can they prove this? That complex eyes have evolved many times? And then they go into that thing about how the octopus eye is very similar to the human eye. Of course, we see through air, they see through water, but they have a very complex, well-developed eye. And they have a verted retina, and we have an inverted retina. Now, evolutionists will make fun of the thing, how we have our blood vessels and nerves in front of our light sensing cells, the rods and cones, whereas an octopus has a very, very similar eye to ours, but it has the blood vessels and nerves behind the light sensing cells, which would correspond to the rods and cones in our eyes. Well, being a sea creature, temperature regulation is pretty easy for you, but for us, the light focusing from the bold sun out through the air, it can focus and overheat the retina of the eye. This is actually a cooling system. And for evolutionists, they'll say, oh, you see, evolution just made, a random error, and your designer is incompetent because look what he did. He put all the blood vessels and nerves in front of the light sensing cells, getting in the way. Well, there's so many bogus straw man arguments there, and I'll just go right for the you can't argue with success. An eagle is a vertebrate like us, and hawks and eagles have some of the best eyesight of any living creatures in the world. An eagle can see a fish under the water a mile away, and they have an inverted retina just like us. You can't call that a design flaw. Somehow it's working pretty good. I don't know if an octopus can do that. And so there's so many, like I said, bogus straw man arguments. I'm not saying, oh, evolution's all stupid. Well, I just proved you wrong. I'm saying, why don't you stop the smoke screens? Why don't you stop all these distracting things and get right down to how mutations can actually write new information? Instead of all of these, and this co-opted thing, I mean, that's a longer discussion about how the jaw bones in reptiles just moved, the hinged jaw moved into the inner ear and became the mammalian ear bones. Very, very fragile, delicate, detailed, small, intricate bones that we used to hear. Reptiles can hear. Why did they need to evolve mammalian inner ear bones and lose the jaw bones? There's so many holes in that kind of a story. I don't know, Caleb. I'm trying to kind of ramble around and get done. I just spent 7 minutes, but is there any part of that you believe I need to jump back to and re-clarify, or did that kind of completely chew and swallow the comment that we just got?
No, I thought a lot of that was very helpful. I know, of course, one of the big arguments that they tried to respond to is a creationist claim that the eye is irreducibly complex, and then they go into the co-opted argument. Would you say the eye is irreducibly complex, meaning everything, it's all or nothing? That's what irreducible complexity is my understanding.
Well, irreducible complexity is handy, and it's a part of intelligent design theory, which agrees with the creation model. But irreducible complexity, I've seen evolutionists be able to, in very selective ways, punch holes in that, like with the bacterial flagella, like with the eye. But they're it's really a bunch of bandying semantics mostly, and assuming the histories of this structure based on whether you believe in the creation model or the evolution model. I don't think irreducible complexity, I think irreducible complexity is a construct that's very useful in talking about anti-evolution stuff, as is intelligent design. But I don't think that on the structural level, the overt level, is a slam dunk for creation. I think on the genetic level, it's a slam dunk for creation. When you start talking about the information in the genome and these genes and how complicated they are. When you talk about one gene that actually has an effect on a dozen different traits all at once, and if you mutate that gene, you're going to affect all of those traits. What's the chance that all of them are going to be better now with the new mutation? Not only that, but that gene can affect other genes. It could affect 30 other genes. And not only that, but that gene could actually be, by the genetic machinery of any cell, it could be cut and spliced onto, the product of that gene can be cut and spliced onto the protein product of another gene. Parts of that gene can be used and other parts not read. And it can be combined with parts of other genes and read. the complexity of this system, that I think is irreducibly complex. You tamper with a system where there are messages that are written and overwritten and overwritten and overwritten, and where like every fifth one spells like a Da Vinci Code thing. I mean, it just has become, and then the epigenetics, the methylation of genes, all of these, the complexity of the genome now and how it actually functions in any species has become so much more complex that it's ruining the evolution DNA story, just like the new data and the complexity ruined the evolution horse story. So as intelligent design and irreducible complexity are viable, but they are actually betraying a deeper complexity that can't be argued against. Whereas the overt expression, I think there are arguments you can make against it. Michael Behe, the big guy in irreducible complexity, has now decided that some macroevolution in some limited sense is possible. And I think it's because if you rely too much on the IC irreducible complexity argument, that you will lose the solid rock feeling of your faith in creation by having that get holes punched in it, or intelligent design having holes punched in it. And that's a theoretical, it's a conceptual construct, but is actually, when you're actually trying to say, is creation true or evolution true, arguing for or against irreducible complexity isn't a open and shut case for which way you should go.
That's interesting. I've never heard it put that way, and I didn't realize Behe was leaning towards some aspects of macro, because I know
that was about 5 years ago or so. He said, and he was talking about mosquitoes and the malaria organism and all of that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know his book Darwin Devolves has been on my list of things to get to, and so I'm not sure what his take is in there.
I think it his book The Limits of Darwinian Change. It was something.
I know he covers that some, I think, in there.
Yeah, and he does concede that some limited, not enough to make the whole evolution story true, but that some limited macroevolution can happen, which is what that other person who put in a question was suggesting. Do creationists deny that some kinds have changed over time? Yeah, certainly they can change, but it's never a writing of new genetic information. It's a shuffling of the deck and redistributing a new hand to the next generation, but it's still cards from the same old deck.
Yeah, in my understanding, I think I have heard another podcast where he talks about there are limits to change. So,
he does believe there are limits, but he's loosened up a little bit on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And I think that's the clear biblical thing we're getting at here is there's created kinds you see in Genesis. But as we mentioned in the beginning of this episode, the reason it all matters is the explanation of what is man? What is the nature of man? Are we just evolved creatures? Are we made in the image of God? Is sin or is death and suffering the result of sin entering into the world, as explained in Genesis 3? And Romans talks about through one man sin entered the world and death to all. And so we do see that we don't want to embrace a storyline that puts death before the fall of man. That means God is calling death good. But as biblical creationists, we affirm that death came into the world in Genesis 3 as the result of sin, and that through one man's obedience, Jesus Christ, all can be made righteous because of his perfect life, his death on our behalf, his substitutionary atonement. He substituted himself and satisfied the wrath of God. And then 3 days later, rose from the grave, conquered sin and death, and all who believe in him will be saved from their sins. It's completely a gift, nothing you can do to earn it. That's why Jesus was perfectly obedient and took upon himself all the wrath of God the Father. And we urge you guys, if you're listening, if you had a stone put in your shoe today of some things you've never thought about, I hope you'll listen to our previous episode and join us next Friday as well as we dive more into these issues in the biology textbooks. And thank you again, Dr. J, for joining us. It's been just a joy and a blessing to have you with us.
We look forward to next Friday again.
Yes, sir. Next Friday at 9 a.m. Hope you guys can join us.